she's one of the first people I ever met at GSHRM back in the day when the meetings were at Thornblade. And she was so nice to me. And I didn't know a soul. That's Laura's MO, and we stay pretty connected with her because Clemson wants to be active. But I'm going to let Laura tell you about her journey and change management. But I did just want to say thank you so much for doing this for us today, Laura, and keep it going.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And Sally, you're going to share your screen for us, right?
Sure, I got it.
Okay, good. Well, yes, I'm Laura Bogardus, and thank you for the very kind introduction, Nan. I appreciate it so much. And yes, we have known each other for a few minutes, haven't we? So I've been working for a long time in human resources and workforce development, in organizational management, and around 2008, I was very curious about human behavior in the workplace, and so I got my master's degree in human behavior and conflict management, and that led me to be very interested in change management. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I've learned over the years and through especially the last couple of years, and hopefully you will gain something useful from it, I sure hope. So again, thank you to Clemson Center for Corporate Learning, and Sally and Nan for asking me to talk with you today. And also thanks for everybody that spent some time here, spending time here today to take a little bit of time out of your day to workshop for a bit and to talk on the subject of change management, and in particular, helping people along the process of individual change. Sally? So what we're going to talk about today is the basics of organizational change and change management. We will conduct a few polls to ask you what you think about a recent change in your company or in your life. We'll talk about the ADKAR model for individual change, which was developed by a company called Prosci, which is a change management research company. Then we'll put the concept of ADKAR to the test, into practice by envisioning a change that you'd like to see a friend or a colleague embrace. And the format for today is kind of a virtual workshop. So I'd like to ask for your help to play along today and make this workshop interactive as much as we can. So I've got some questions to ask, and you can respond in the chat box. We've got a few polls, and then toward the end, you're going to need some way to take some notes, make some notes so that we can practice the ADKAR model. And I'll just like to say, change management, it's an entire discipline, it's an entire profession, and I'm only going to be able to hit the highlights of those things in just this short hour. So please, for those of you that have experience in change management, please forgive me for skimming over some of the topics like resistance management or sponsorship roadmaps, and I just appreciate that. Next slide. I have to make a disclaimer. I am a change management practitioner. I am not a change management trainer, but Prosci is the company that certified me. They have incredible resources that are available for free that you can download. So a lot of I'm going to show you some slides today that came from Prosci that I'm authorized to use as a practitioner, but just want to refer you again back to them should you have you want to dig into this a little more deeply. So next slide. All right, when we think of organizational change, we most likely already have a good idea of what it means. But of course, there's a whole lot of definitions out there. And one good overall definition is from Harvard Business School, which says that organizational change is the actions in which a company or business alters a major component of its organization, such as its culture, the underlying technologies or infrastructure that it uses to operate, or its internal processes. So in plain language, what this means, when a business changes something that has to do with its culture, its technology, its processes or infrastructure, especially or including its people, then it's making an organizational change. So I picked on Clemson here. So sometimes sometimes in large organizations with multiple departments, you can have a single department, like an IT department that has its own definition and process for change management. I would encourage you to look this up to see an example of a great IT change management definition. And of course, any single department's change management procedure has got to be closely connected with the larger organization's overall change management efforts. But this is a really good reference to take a quick look at. Next. Okay, so organizational changes, they can range in size and scope from adaptive to transformational and everything in between. So adaptive changes on the far left side are smaller incremental changes that organizations adopt to address their evolving needs. Typically, these changes are maybe minor modifications and adjustments that managers can make to fine-tune a business strategy. There's a few examples I put up here of making changes to a benefits package or starting to require employees to wear a mask. Those are examples of adaptive changes. And if you would, feel free to share in the chat box an example of an adaptive change that you have experienced. Okay, Jada says Salesforce use. New CRM. Changes to benefits, mask wearing. Okay. Remote learning with students. Okay, great examples. So on the other end of the spectrum, you have transformational changes, and these are larger in scale and scope than adaptive changes. And transformational changes can be a shift in a mission or strategy, a change in the company structure or the team structure or overall business processes. And because of their scale, these changes, they often take a lot of time and energy to put into place. And though it's not always the case, transformational changes are often made in response to external forces, which we're quite aware of what some of those external forces can be this year. A couple of examples of transformational changes could be a company merger. Thank you. A company merger, or say manufacturing a new product, or maybe even converting to a fully remote workplace. So I think that some of you actually shared some transformational changes as well in the chat box. But if you've got some that you're thinking of and specifically that are larger in scope, move to electromobility. Yes, really bigger changes that are affecting all parts of the organization. Okay. So I'm sure this comes as no big surprise to you, but according to Prosci, organizations are reaching change saturation. And just call the date of the survey to your mind. It was done in 2019, so a lot's changed since then. This is a survey that's conducted every few years by Prosci. Their primary research is focused on building internal change management competency, and there were close to just under 2,000 people or respondents from companies around the world that responded to this. And you can see just in the blue part of the box there that 73% of the respondents in 2019 reported that their organizations are either past, at, or nearing the change saturation point. So that means, you know, we're inundated with change at work, of course, but we all know that already. Okay, so that's a lot of anxiety, I think, to absorb all of this change and to manage it. But very simply put, we can break it down to 3 phases of organizational change. And I don't know why, but whenever I think of these 3 steps, I think of one of my favorite movies from the late 80s, and it was Bull Durham, and maybe you've probably seen it, but it's about a minor league baseball team and its fans. And I'll just share this little bit, but in this bit, the baseball coach appears in the locker room to his players, and they've just lost another game, and frustratingly, he tells them how simple the game is.
Throw the ball, you hit the ball, you catch the ball.
And that's it. So you throw the ball, you hit the ball, and you catch the ball. Well, in change management, you prepare for the change, you manage the change, and you reinforce the change. And I wish it was that simple, but baseball is not very simple, and neither is change management. But we can try to break it down. So let's briefly, I'll talk about these 3 phases. So to prepare for the change. Well, why? Obviously, you want to develop. Go back to where we were, if you wouldn't mind, Sally. Yes, thank you. Why you want to develop this customized, appropriately sized approach to the change project with the right kind of leadership, sponsorship, and the right type of team structure. And so how you might do this, well, you might define your strategy, you might prepare your team, you might get your top leader, your sponsor ready to lead the change. Next, you want to manage the change. Why do you want to do this? Well, obviously you want to create and then implement the plans that will move your organization from the present state to the future state, so that you'll realize that change. So how do you do that? Well, some of the activities you would do to manage the change include creating a communications plan, developing a sponsorship roadmap, training your employees, putting together coaching plans, and figuring out how you're going to manage resistance to the change. And then the third piece, reinforcing the change. Well, why do you do this? You want that change to be adopted and sustained. So some things you might do to help reinforce the change is to collect and analyze feedback. You might want to diagnose the gaps in the process, and then you're going to manage that resistance. Maybe you'll be implementing some corrective actions, and especially you want to celebrate your successes as part of reinforcement. Okay, now I'm ready for the next slide. So in order to implement the 3 phases of organizational change, we need to involve 3 components of this change, which are laid out here in this Prosci project change triangle model. So we want to involve all 3 components of the change in order to meet our project objectives. We want to make sure that our project is done, completed on time and on budget. And we want to make sure that we are realizing our return on investment. So let me briefly introduce these 3 different parts of this triangle. So in the bottom left-hand side, that's the project management component. And that's the technical side of change that moves a project from the current to the future state. That's probably the area you hear of the most when it comes to making change. This is about designing and developing and delivering a change. And so project management, it involves, concept of the project, planning and designing the project, implementing the project, the closure of the project. So some of the tools that you might use for project management include setting up your business case, putting together a work breakdown structure, estimating your budget, developing your resource allocation plan, and scheduling and tracking, figuring out a scheduling and tracking mechanism so you can stay on track. So that's project management in a nutshell. The lower right-hand corner is the change management component, and that is the people side of change that moves a project from the current state to the future state. So that is really about embracing, adopting, and using the change. Okay, so some of the tools you might use for change management include a readiness assessment. As your organization ready to make this change, a communications plan, you might develop a leadership coaching plan, a training plan, and that resistance management plan. And a plan, of course, to reinforce the change that you want to make. And then at the top of the triangle.
Laura, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Manfred had asked, considering deliberate change of corporate culture, would that be considered a transformational change? Does it matter if it's deliberate or just something that's more reactionary?
Yeah, so transformational changes can be external or internal. And I would consider a change in corporate culture to be more of a transformational change. You're really changing what that organization is their vision and their mission for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for calling that to my attention. All right, and then I'll go back to this triangle. At the top of the triangle is the leadership or sponsorship component. And that moves that project forward from the current to the future state. And this is the individual or the group that has the power to legitimize this change. And without the strong support of leadership, it's that supporting the model and supporting the change, and modeling that change, then the change is a lot less likely to reach implementation and adoption. So next. I just want to make a quick comment about the importance of sponsorship or leadership. There's 3 components to sponsorship. And the first is the sponsor really needs to visibly participate in the change from start to finish. B, the sponsor needs to build support for the change. And C, and this is really, really important, the sponsor needs to communicate directly with the people affected by the change. So that's that sponsor or that leader's role. This is a survey by Prosci in 2018 where they asked employees whom they preferred receiving business-focused messages, such as like the reason for an impending change or the expected outlook for the company as a result of the change. And the answer for those business-focused messages, we want to hear that from the top leadership, usually the CEO or the president or the executive manager, that top leader that is really championing the change. But when they asked who they preferred hearing more personal messages, such as how it might affect their own job or their own department, the way they do their work, the answer is overwhelmingly the employee's direct supervisor. So this data provides evidence to the importance not only of the top leadership being engaged in modeling the change project, but also the importance of supervisors, those direct frontline supervisors being prepared to guide individuals through the change management. Okay, so now I want to ask you to participate again. I'd like to ask you to think of something that your company changed within the last year, such as a process, a policy, technology, and type that into the chat box. Try to think of something that's more on the transformational side if you can, and something that had an impact on people, that required some behavioral change from people. And if you can't think of anything from work, maybe think about something that you've experienced as a change in, say, another part of your life, like a club or an organization you belong to, or church or something like that. Sally, you want to read out some of these examples?
Have to unmute.
Oh,
Um, realignments of business units from separate units to a consolidated market platform, the reporting structure, achieved ISO 9000 certification, began targeting operational practices to fit within the standard. Jacob says mindset change to higher accountability. Sean says we've done an acquisition of a computer and an ERP implementation in the same, of a competitor, sorry, and ERP implementation in the same year. Brittany implemented a virtual counseling initiative to support youth through COVID. Jessica, moving our mini MBA from in-person classroom to virtual. Marnie, virtual visits, community matters information sessions, virtual networking events. Moving from desktops to docking stations, not having laptops and desktop. And Mark, shifting from event-based to relationship-based and fundraising strategy.
okay, Sally, I'm gonna stop you right there because we've got lots of amazing examples, and maybe you can make the chat available for people afterwards.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yes,
but
chat will be available for everybody. So.
Okay, great. So lots of excellent examples, and you can see that it certainly runs the gamut from, related to IT projects and related to culture or values or changing over processes. So it's really a wide variety. So with that change in mind, I want to ask a few poll questions. Okay, so what I want to do is ask you, was the change implemented throughout the company by the projected date? It was rolled out on time, people adapted and used the change within the projected time frame. Okay, well, that's good news. Most of you reported that the project was completed on time, and then but there's a substantial number that said longer than projected or no project implementation schedule. Okay, let's do the next poll. How did people? We'll wait for Sally. How did people that were impacted by the change react to the change? We're assuming that you had some type of impact on behavior, some kind of behavioral change was required. Maybe they were employees that had to change something, or leaders of the company, perhaps customers, the public, clients. Okay. All right. Interesting. So about 50% that, almost 50% that embraced and adapted this change. So some of you all are doing a really good job with your change management. And then also we've got some that reluctantly have adapted to the change, and then a few that have refused to make the change or fought the change. All right, let's go to the next one. Did the change implementation of the project lead to the expected return on investment? That's our next poll. Did the change implementation lead to the expected ROI? All right, looks like we've got a pretty good percent that aren't sure if that ROI was achieved, but another good percentage that achieved higher than expected or the expected return on investment. So that's good. And then our last poll is going to be a question: was there a visible, credible leader or sponsor that was championing the change project? Okay, great. Well, I see that you had a lot, the majority, 3/4 had a visible, credible leader, and that's fantastic. And that's probably why you have really good results with your outcomes. Okay, so let's move on. Just click on through those questions to the triangle. There we go. Okay, so reflecting back on your responses to the poll questions, do you think that the changes relative implementation, the implementation, was it on time and on budget? Did you meet the expected ROI? Were those things influenced by any of these three components, by the leadership, project management, or the change management? And that can be positive or negative. So just something to think about. And next slide. So it's important to remember that we change for a reason. We apply change management to realize the benefits and the desired outcomes of our change. And oftentimes we find that organizations will put a lot of focus on the project management, but don't necessarily emphasize enough of the change management component. And most of the time, we can't be very successful without a plan to manage the people side of the change. We can't achieve our goals without that piece and without the leadership piece. So next. So hopefully we've come to an understanding that the people side of change is as important as the technical side, and that both change management and project management are interrelated with the quality of the leadership or the sponsorship of the change. And thinking again about the change that you named in the chat box, just kind of go through these four things. What was that project? Why was it implemented? What was changed? And who made changes in their lives in order to make the change happen on time and on budget? So something to consider for every change that you're making. Next. Also, when you're thinking about the change project that you named, about what percentage of your project outcomes are linked to people changing how they do their work? And I'll ask you to type that percentage into the chat box. What percentage of your project outcomes are linked to people changing? Yeah, good range, 20% on up to 100%, 75, 50%. So something to think about as you consider those three aspects of the change management. And it leads us to the next point.
Is there an answer, or is it just
Oh, it's all depending on the time. No, there's no answer.
I wonder what the answer is.
No answer to this one. It depends on the change that you're trying to implement. You could have a change that requires very little behavior change from people, or something that requires them to do their work, their jobs entirely differently from start to finish. So just something to reflect on and think about as you are evaluating how to make those change management plans. And my point really is being from the next slide that individual change is really important. And individual and change so important because organizational change requires individual change, and the organizational outcomes are the collective result of individual change. Let's go to the next slide here, and I want to check my time. Okay, so here's a couple of key concepts that I wanted to share, and I'll just briefly touch on these concepts. There's a lot more to them, but I don't want to leave them out, but yet at the same time, we need another couple of hours for it. So just with regard to some of these concepts, every change can be viewed from the perspective of a sender or a receiver. And it tends to be that the sender typically focuses on the business reason for changing. They tend to describe the change in terms of the business impact and how the change is good for the company. But the receiver will most likely focus on how that change affects them personally or causes personal risk. So you kind of want to pay attention to how you phrase or the content of the message, knowing that your receivers are likely going to internalize from a personal perspective what that change means to them personally. So, building awareness of a need for change doesn't mean that automatically people will have the desire to change, right? So, I mean, again, think about masks. There was some resistance, I think, to masks. So a really good idea doesn't equal natural change. Resistance is normal, it's natural, because change creates anxiety and worry and uncertainty, and people want to hold on to their current state lots of times out of fear of losing what they currently have for something that they're not sure of in the future. So each person has this personal way of interpreting the change, and really impact a lot of our views of ourselves, whether we can picture ourselves being successful with the change or not. That impacts that resistance level as well. Again, the sponsor needs to be actively and visibly participating in the change through those ABCs of sponsorship. And when sponsors do this, the change project is going to benefit. It'll have sufficient resources, hopefully, most likely. It'll have roadblocks to making the change removed. And you can get support from other leaders when you have a visible sponsor. And employees will have a better understanding of the change. And when they experience resistance, they'll at least have a channel to express those concerns. Culture and values impact the level of adoption of change. It's a hefty subject. I'm going to move past that one. But the scope and the pace of the change is also a factor. So if you have a choice in the matter, which we don't always have a choice, but if you do, you want to plan how quickly and how much change can be adopted by your organization. And that a lot of times depends on your company's culture and values. Right isn't enough. So the right way or the best answer isn't enough to create buy-in. It doesn't create commitment, and it doesn't necessarily eliminate fear. Regardless of whether your change is a brilliant plan or not, employees want to often ask, why are we changing in the first place? Why aren't we doing things the same? What's wrong with the way we do things now? Why is now the time to make the change? And does the leadership really back this? Do they really believe in it or not? Are they really committed? So that's an important point. Change is a process. People go through that process, and it's not just a single announcement. You don't announce that a change is going to take place and then it's done. We have to allow people to move through that process. So of these key concepts, I just want to ask you to type into the chat box, which of these do you think has the most significant impact on successful change implementation? There is a right answer to this question.
Laura, I have I think Manfred made another comment as far as just, getting buy-in, even though you're not necessarily getting or trying to create or facilitate a certain behavior change from individuals, but at least having buy-in from those individuals would help to facilitate that change. Sorry, it's
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent point. Yeah.
and I think that goes along, I guess, with the resistance piece.
Yes. I see lots of answers and lots of great answers. I'll tell you what the number one answer is that visible executive sponsorship for change leadership. It's the change leadership. That's the number one reason for managing change or successful managing change. Okay, let's move on to the next concept, which is ADKAR, which is this model for individual change that is a Prosci model. According to this model, there's 5 building blocks to successful change, and that's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these. So awareness represents being aware of the need for change. When people have awareness of the need for change, they might say something like I understand why we're doing this. But when you have, when folks are missing the awareness piece, you might have employees asking the same questions over and over. You might find that people are fearful of the change, and they might resort to hoarding information or not sharing resources. Desire represents the desire to participate in the change and support the change. And that kind of leads back to the comment that was made a little earlier too. You've got to have that desire there. If people have the desire to change, a person might say, well, I've made the decision to implement such and such, or this is, I've accepted that we're gonna do it this way. But when desire is missing, you're gonna feel the impact and usually lower productivity, increased turnover, delays in implementation, that type of thing. Knowledge is really about knowing how to make the change. If someone is missing the knowledge element, they might not fully or correctly utilize the new system, and there could be a reduction in productivity. Ability represents the ability to implement the required skills and behaviors. With ability, people have the confidence to be able to make the change and the tools available to make the change. And its ability is different from knowledge. So you can intellectually know how to do something, but if you haven't applied the knowledge, or let's say you're missing the tools, let's say you're implementing a new software, you can know about the software, but if you haven't had a chance to use it, or let's say the software has bugs in it, then your ability to use this change is not there. And then lastly, reinforcement is again about sustaining the change. And with reinforcement, employees will continue to implement the change over time, but without it, employees can be tempted as soon as there's a little disruption to go back to the old way of doing a task. This is where your utilization rates can suffer here without reinforcement. And then it makes it more difficult to implement change in the future if your reinforcement is not there. Next slide. Just an important thing to remember that everybody changes or goes through these processes at a different rate. Even in the same environment, you have different people who will go through the process at different times, or at different speeds, I mean. Okay, so now for our exercise, we are going to get out our pen and paper or tablet. Brittany, I saw you yawn. Don't fall asleep. Okay, so what I want you to do is think about a personal change in behavior that you're trying to facilitate with a friend, with a family member, with a neighbor, somebody that you're trying to assist or that you think should make a change. And I'll give you, I don't know, 30 seconds or so to write that down. And maybe if you can use the thumbs up on your video when you're finished to give us an idea. And also keep in mind, I'm going to ask a few of you to turn your mic on and share your results of the exercise when we're done. Sally, I can't see everybody's video, so maybe you can help me get an idea of when we should move to the next one.
Okay, we have a raised hand. Don't know if you wanted to unmute and ask a question. L. Sharf.
No, I was just letting you know that I had mine written down.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I think we're good.
let's move on to the next part. So now, next slide. Yes. Now we want to list the reasons that you believe that this change is necessary for this person. You can give the thumbs up or raise your hand when you're finished. Okay, let's move to the next question or next task, I mean. All right, let's list the factors or consequences, the good factors, the bad factors for this person that can create a desire to change or dissuade a desire to change. Consequences that can create or dissuade somebody from changing, from having the desire to change. Okay, next. List the skills and the knowledge needed for the change. This can be skills that are needed during the change or after the change is made.
And I appreciate some of you guys sharing your lists in the chat.
It's good to have examples.
Yes. Okay, Werner, thank you. We'll see you in a bit.
Okay, let's move on to the next. So considering the skills and the knowledge that you listed, think about the person's ability to perform or act in the new way. Are there any barriers that are inhibiting the person's ability? This is the ability question. What may be enabling the person to utilize those skills and knowledge, or inhibiting them from doing so? Being stubborn.
Brittany, your parents are as stubborn as mine are, apparently.
They are totally stubborn.
And then the last question here is to list the reinforcements that will help the person retain the change. So can you think of incentives that could be put in place to help the person make the change stick? Or incentives, maybe there's incentives that are not to change. So
Laura, I have a question. Is this is this intended to be kind of a along with the person, like the person is helping to answer these questions, or are you creating this for that person?
Yeah, no, this is more a visioning process. By imagining someone else in this, making this change, you can, one, take it outside of your own person, and two, you can kind of model how you might go through these same components when considering making individual change in your business. So it's just an example to show you. And hey, if you come up with a great strategy here and you want to use it with that person you're thinking of, then by all means. But it's an exercise, a visioning exercise.
Okay.
All right. So now let's go to the next piece, which is on the next slide. And here I want to write down or rate on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest, where you think that person is in terms of their awareness from those items that you listed, their desire to make the change, their knowledge and skills about the making the change, their ability to implement the change, and then the degree to which the person is reinforced to stick with the change. So give that a rating on each area. And Manfred said, yes, you cannot change a person without a person's collaboration. Absolutely. I'm not trying to show you how to change somebody else. You really can't change somebody else, but you're wanting to practice walking through, being aware of these different stages that people go through as they process change, and being able to help them along that road to change. These steps are important.
And I think, Nancy, you said, a little bit further up, talking about providing confidence or building confidence. I think self-efficacy which is the confidence that a person has in their ability to do something, is really important. Not only do we need to think about how, number one, talking about how important a change is, but how confident does somebody feel that they can actually implement that change themselves? And that has to do with their self-efficacy. So I really am glad that you mentioned that, and building confidence.
And that's true, right? So all of these individual changes aggregate together to make organizational change and will impact your results. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll see that the lowest score, go back one more. Any scores, or the first score below a 3 is going to be where you're going to find your first barrier point. So why don't we hear from somebody, 1 or 2 or 3 people that would like to share a little bit about the change that they are envisioning for a friend or a colleague to make, and as well as the barrier point that they've identified. And we can just maybe Sally, again, maybe you want to call out. We could certainly pick on Brittany or Nancy.
Okay, Nancy, let's go ahead and if you could just maybe talk a little bit about what you were commenting on in the section, and what potential barrier points there might be.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So mine is really more on the workplace related. So having a team lead who does, just an outstanding job on productivity, I feel strongly that if patience were practiced, or just some time taken to really identify, how would you say it, maybe key deliverables, I think is what I used, instead of passing over them. Like sometimes this person will want to get to the end quickly. And so tasks are missed, information is missed. And so, at times we have to backtrack. The challenge is, I don't know that she really has the desire, where I may need it to happen. And I believe that she absolutely has the ability to do it. I just don't know how to reposition her to take the time to do it. And I call it checklisting. So, there are checklisters out there where they want to get that task off their checklist, but sometimes not being thorough will delay the progress or the quality of the impact when you move too fast. So.
Nancy, I'll just make a quick comment there. When you're communicating with this person, I would look at communicating both, the business impact, but especially the impact that this person is having on their own career and their own success in the role that they have, and how they can maximize that their own personal success by changing the method in which they're using.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just not, I absolutely agree. And I'll have to think about how to really craft that, because the work is really good. It's just when moving too fast through it, some things are missed. And I'm just a firm believer that, of course, time is your greatest asset. So when you have to go back and do something that could have been tackled up front, that's where I get a little frustrated as a lead also. But crafting it so that I don't insult her. She's very intelligent, very good.
So she's got the knowledge and the ability to do it.
She does, but she wants to get it off the list. So check.
Well, think about a reinforcement as well, of positive reinforcement to
yes,
complete the work the way that it needs to be done. Thank you for sharing, Nancy.
Thank you.
Brittany, how about you?
Let me unmute myself. Now, this is personal, or are we talking about
It can be either.
Another
It can be a
situation.
personal, it can be business.
Well, since most of that has been woven together due to last year's pandemic, it's been a quite a unique time with, even as I try to put these numbers in the correct order of what I think they might be. I mean, I feel like ability can be learned. So I feel like I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this. My awareness of change, knowing what needs to happen, sometimes is easier than the implementation process, especially when it involves other people. Like, for instance, a board of a nonprofit. Sometimes people's work ethic is different. Sometimes health concerns come into play. Sometimes, there are financial issues that, depending on the organization, can be an issue and a barrier. So you're teaching me so much with this. The reinforcement of what you try to implement or what you try to express with what's needed to be done sometimes hits home and sometimes it doesn't. So to be honest, all the numbers that I put in my in my chat, I'm not sure if I go back and look at it again, I'm not sure if I put the numbers in the same way.
Well, luckily it's not a scientific
I know
You don't have
I'm
to be
positive I'm overthinking it. I'm almost positive that I'm doing that.
Well, awareness is probably the easiest. It's the first item. So people need to be aware of the need for change in order to do any of the other, in order to accomplish any of the other areas. So that is probably the first or the easiest goal to achieve.
Well, sometimes I know desire, and I guess I'm speaking for myself, but if you don't have the desire or the ambition and the drive to be willing to make a change, does that tie into awareness? Are they close together? Because sometimes you can have the desire to do something, but not have the awareness of what needs to be done to get to the end result.
You probably wouldn't have lacking the knowledge then.
Okay.
To get to that end result. You might be aware of the change and you want to make the change, but you lack the knowledge.
The knowledge. Okay.
Yeah. Or you just can't figure out how you might implement it.
Or the lacking of the resources. Would that fall into awareness?
The tools would then impact your ability.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so it is 12. I want to wrap up here, and the next slide is just a summary of what we did, what we learned about. We talked about preparing for change, managing change, reinforcing change. We talked about how complex change management is when we're representing the people-sided change. We walked through some of our own changes that our companies have gone through, and we learned a little bit about ADKAR, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, and how they flow together as part of the individual change process. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody for being here. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you can reach out to me if you have additional questions. But I thank Sally and Nan and Clemson Center for Corporate Learning for hosting this today.
Thank you so much, Laura, for being here. And I did want to say that we, like I said, we are recording it, but we also will provide you a PDF of the slide deck. So that will be something that you'll receive as well. Sorry, it's my dog. And I'll just make sure that if you have any further questions or anything else, please feel free to contact us. And our website is thinkclemson.com. just thinkclemson.com, and you can get in contact with us. So thank you so much for coming, Laura. It's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed learning about this today. So you guys have a great day, and a great enough. The days are just running together. So,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you so much. Bye-bye.